Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jessie if you're new here, and today we are going to be talking about my labour and birth story. Grab yourself a coffee or cup of tea or whatever, because I think it's going to be a long old video. And nothing had happened, and yeah, so on the Tuesday night at 7 p.m. the pessary was removed. John had to go home. Then at 7 o'clock, well, he could stay during the induction, but there was no point in both of us being tired, and I kind of needed him to be the voice of reason during labour. So during the induction process, he was kind of leaving at about 9 o'clock at night to go home, get some sleep, and he would come back at about 8 o'clock in the morning. So I actually couldn't sleep because I was so uncomfortable. So after John had gone at about 9 o'clock that night, I downloaded things on Netflix. So I was basically just sat in as comfortable a position as I could get myself at the size I was, sat watching comedy on my phone, because I kind of wanted to try and keep myself happy and not kind of like dwell and think about labour and the fact that the pessary hadn't worked within the 24 hours type thing. So I watched comedy on my phone, and then I think it was about 10:30, I kind of like tried to lie down. I had like a blanket with me which I put in between my knees because I'd forgotten my pregnancy pillow basically. So I kind of put my blanket in between my knees and just kind of like lay on my side and tried to get some sleep. But within half an hour I kind of needed to get up to go for a wee anyway, and I stood up about 11 o'clock, stood up out of bed and kind of went, oh, that doesn't feel right. And my waters had broken. So I kind of rang for the midwife just to kind of let her know, and she just said kind of keep an eye on it, you know, keep an eye on contractions if you start getting any, and just give us kind of a ring if you need us. So that was all fine. I tried to get a bit more sleep, but I was having kind of like, at the time, mild contractions. So they kind of felt a bit like really strong period cramps, but in terms of contractions, they were really mild. So I kind of just used the hypnobirthing that I'd done, kind of like breathed through them. They were getting a little bit more intense, but nothing major. And I ended up ringing John at about 4 in the morning, I think, and just saying, you know, I've been having contractions for about 5 hours now. So, you know, I don't know if you want to come in, or if you want to come in normally at like 7, or within like an hour he was in the hospital anyway. He walked in at about 5 in the morning. So yeah, about 9 o'clock in the morning, I think, the midwife came and said, okay, I'm going to take you down to labour ward. They were super busy down in labour ward. They actually took a midwife from upstairs where I was staying, and she was my midwife downstairs in labour ward, because they just still didn't have any midwives available, and because my waters had broke the night before and I was having mild contractions, they wanted to kind of get me down there. When I was down there, they did a quick exam to see how dilated I was, and I was only 1 centimetre, which was a bit disheartening. So I did have to go on the induction drip. Once they'd done like all the checks and things, the doctor had come in, done all the sign off. I was put on the induction drip, which I think is a dopamine drip, which goes in just like a cannula in your hand. They kind of slowly increase the dose of this drip throughout the time. What that does is it basically forces your uterus to contract, or your uterus to contract? Yeah, to contract and kind of open your cervix up, to make you obviously more dilated. So yeah, I couldn't eat anything when I was on the dopamine drip. So when you're on the induction drip, you can't eat. You're nil by mouth, and you can only have kind of like drinks. So I could have kind of like a still Lucozade energy drink or water, but you couldn't have fizzy drinks or like tea and coffee. Just in case you needed to go to theatre as well, I think, because with inductions there is an increased risk of intervention, which I had known from doing reading the hypnobirthing book, and I kind of didn't want to be induced, but at the point where I was, and I was so uncomfortable and kind of no sign of the baby coming naturally, I decided it would be best for the safety of myself and the safety of the baby to have the induction drip. With that, because I was overdue, also you have to be monitored, so I was constantly hooked up to a machine for the baby to be monitored, so I couldn't use the birthing pool, which I wanted to do as a form of pain relief, and I couldn't kind of like get up and walk around, which was a bit annoying. You know, it was the start of this whole pregnancy, this labour and birth journey was nothing like I had envisioned it to be. Especially with reading the hypnobirthing book, you have kind of like an ideal situation in mind of what you would like your birth to be like, and mine just kind of started off completely the opposite of what I kind of envisioned, but I was open obviously to change, because you can't control these situations. So I was open to whatever that would get the baby here safely, basically. So yeah, induction drip went in, and I was hooked up to a monitor. Obviously I couldn't eat, I hadn't had breakfast that morning, because I was taken down before the breakfast cart came, so I was hungry. I hadn't eaten since about 5 o'clock on the Tuesday night, so yeah, I was over 12 hours of not having anything to eat, and then obviously however long labour took, I wouldn't be able to eat until after the baby was here. So yeah, I was already hungry going into labour, which isn't good, because obviously you need quite a lot of energy to labour. It's a very physically and mentally draining process. It's magical what the female body can do, it really is. But I said in my previous video I wasn't going to sugarcoat it and make it seem like a basket of roses, because my experience wasn't a basket of roses. I obviously am very grateful that my baby was born healthy and happy, but yeah, it's definitely not the way people portray it on social media, because you only see the best bits of people's lives. But I obviously will show the best bits of my life, but I will also be completely honest with you, because I don't see the point in lying about it, because you're just going to be angry with those people if you go through it or when you go through it. So, and I wish someone had been so real like this with me. I did watch all of Caris Whitaker's, so Caris and James Whitaker, if you don't watch their channel, I would definitely subscribe to their channel, because it's a great one. And Caris was actually very open and honest about her pregnancy, her labour and her birth, and also her postpartum body, which was really refreshing. And I can't thank her enough, really, for her honesty during her pregnancy and her birth. You know, she's probably one of the only YouTubers that hasn't been like, oh, it was just all fabulous. Like, you know, she detailed the struggles that she went through, and it was 100% true reflection of pregnancy, labour and birth, and postpartum body, which she's still kind of showing almost a year on. So if you don't watch James and Caris Whitaker's vlogs, please go and give them a big shout. And little Amber, their little girl, is gorgeous and such a happy little girl. It's just been a joy to kind of watch her grow up as well through that. So definitely give them a shout out. So yeah, the induction drip, couldn't eat anything. Sorry, I'm just referring to my notes. Pool, couldn't walk around, which was my ideal kind of like labour. So I did use gas and air. That's the only form of pain relief that I wanted to use and had originally planned on using. I didn't want any morphine drip, which I didn't take. I didn't take the morphine drip, but I did have morphine, which I'll explain now. So after a few hours of induced labour, I was exhausted. I didn't have any kind of like fuel reserves because I hadn't eaten properly. I wasn't drinking properly because I just felt exhausted. I couldn't even stomach water, and the thought of my orange Lucozade drink was making me feel physically sick. And I think that was to do with the way the dopamine drip had reacted with me, or was like kind of manifesting itself in me. Yeah, I just couldn't stomach fluids. So I couldn't eat, I wasn't drinking properly, and the gas and air kind of wasn't touching the sides with the contractions. Basically, as they were increasing the drip, the contractions were getting increasingly worse and stronger. So I was trying to breathe through, use the gas and air, but they were just so strong. And I had read and researched that induced contractions are a hell of a lot stronger than a naturally occurring contraction. So yeah, I was talking to my midwife, asked for advice from my midwife who had 3 children herself, so you know, she kind of had been through it before a few times, and she said that when she had an epidural it was just magical for her because she could relax. Like subconsciously I was obviously very tense even though I didn't feel tense. So she said she could relax after her epidural, and it kind of just all happened, and you know, what will be will be. So I asked for an epidural, which again, on my birth preferences, never say birth planned because nothing goes to plan, but on my birth preferences I didn't want an epidural, and I didn't want to be offered an epidural. If I wanted one, I wanted to be the one to ask, and that was exactly what happened. The midwife didn't offer me an epidural because I think John had a quick word and said she doesn't want to be offered pain relief, she wants to be the one to ask for it. So I asked for an epidural. I asked for advice on an epidural first, and then I asked for the epidural based on that advice. So the anaesthetist came, administered the epidural, so that all went through okay. It took about 20 minutes, half an hour to put that in. Once that was in, I believe I fell asleep for an hour, because I think it was just the sheer relief that the pain, I couldn't feel the pain of the contraction. So yeah, I fell asleep, John said. So that epidural only actually lasted 3 hours. It burnt through my system quite quickly, and the epidural lasted about 3 hours. It should have lasted longer. Obviously you get given like a top-up button which you can use every 20 minutes. If you press it before the 20 minutes, it doesn't administer anything. The anaesthetist was called in because obviously it should have lasted longer than that. She actually came in with a big syringe full of fentanyl, which I believe is a kind of like what's it called? I was given a big syringe of fentanyl through the epidural, like a tube that goes into your back, which is, I believe, is morphine, but I'm not 100% sure. So that is when I did have some kind of like medication that I didn't originally want, because it does pass through the placenta. It makes the baby very idle and relaxed, like it would for you. So that lasted only about 3.5 hours. Again, it should have lasted a lot longer, but for me it just didn't last very long. It burnt through my system very, very quickly. Again, like I said, the contractions through the drip were insane. So they were so strong, and they were kind of happening very regularly. I was having 3 in 10, and when I was examined again, I was only 5 centimetres dilated, and by this point I should have been 8 or 9, I believe the midwife said. So the doctor was brought in to consult with the midwife, go through kind of what had happened. At this point it had been just over 24 hours since my water had broke, and they don't like to leave it longer than 24 hours really, because there's a higher risk of the baby getting an infection then, because they're not protected by that fluid. So it was suggested that I go in for an emergency C-section because I wasn't dilating any further than 5 centimetres. I'd been 5 centimetres for a few hours, the midwife had said, so I hadn't budged from 5 centimetres even with the regular contractions. So yeah, I was advised to have an emergency C-section. That would be the safest way to get baby here, and it would be the safest way for me to deliver the baby, just because my body kind of wasn't doing what it naturally should do, even with the help of the induction drip. So I went down I was prepped for surgery, went down for surgery, and because my epidural had failed twice, usually what they would do is they would just top up that epidural because it's kind of already there. So they said to me they would normally just top up the epidural, which would numb you so that they could perform the C-section. But because my epidural had failed twice, I was then given a spinal block, which goes in just a bit further up, kind of like just below your kind of like boob area type thing. So it goes in a little bit higher than the epidural went in, because they can't go into the same space. And the spinal block was administered. When that went in, I was basically numb from kind of like under boobs down. I couldn't feel a thing. And yeah, the pain had just gone, like it was such a relief. But you're basically lay. What also happened was, another reason for the C-section was because I wasn't drinking, because I couldn't stomach liquids. When you have an epidural, they put a catheter in, which is for your urine, obviously, because you can't walk about to go to the toilet, and you can't feel when you're going to go to the toilet. So I had a catheter put in, but my catheter had been in for a fair few hours and nothing, it was empty. So they had some kind of reservations on my kidney function. Obviously my body was extremely swollen. I wasn't drinking. They had put me on a saline drip, so I had 2 bags of saline just to kind of get some fluids into my body, but that still wasn't passing through urine. So the hope was that the saline drip, so by putting fluids into my body through a drip, it would then go through my kidneys and kind of make its way out in urine. But that wasn't happening. So yeah, they were concerned over my kidney function, and that was another reason to get the baby out, was because they didn't want my kidneys to shut down, basically. So yeah, it was classed as an emergency. Obviously I was exhausted, I hadn't eaten in over 24 hours, and yeah, I was just knackered. So that spinal block was a welcome pain relief. This hand that had kind of, the tube inside had twisted, so they couldn't use that anymore. So then they tried to put one in this hand, in the back of my hand, but the vein, they couldn't find the vein. They then tried in my wrists. They couldn't find that one in the side of my wrist, so it ended up going here. So when I went in for a C-section, I was actually laid out in crucifix. So they had blood pressure monitors and kind of like everything on this arm, and then this arm I had to have out because of the cannula. So I had a 3-prong cannula in this arm. And then I had obviously like all the monitors. I had them kind of placed around here so that I could have skin to skin with baby. So I was laid in a crucifix style, and then they put a sheet up kind of like just under your boob area, and they put a big blue sheet up so that you can't see. So once the spinal block had gone in and I was all set up, for theatre. They obviously check that I can't feel anything, which I couldn't. So they started the C-section. Obviously you've got the anaesthetist up by your head, keeping an eye on all your stats and everything, and kind of I kept asking him questions when things were beeping. I was like, is everything okay? Like, because I just kept kind of like dipping in and out. And I think it was because I was just so exhausted and I'd had that pain taken away that was keeping me awake. I was kind of nodding off, but in my head, I didn't know if I was nodding off or kind of like passing out and losing consciousness. So I kept asking the anaesthetist, is everything okay? I keep like dipping in and out, and he said, all your stats are fine, like you're just really tired. So I obviously didn't want to miss anything. Obviously at the same time John was up by my head as well, so he was sat all gowned up with me. And yeah, I heard the baby cry, so I just kind of said, oh, the baby's out. And the surgeon that was performing the C-section said, no, that's just his head. This doesn't usually happen. But as soon as they popped the baby's head out of the incision, they let out a little cry, which they don't normally do until the whole body is out, and it's like, you know, the shock of the cold air, like, ooh. But yeah, head came out, cry. I was like, oh, the baby's out, and I was like, oh, that's it, and no, that's just his head. So it took another couple of minutes to get the baby out. The baby was then taken to be cleaned off. Just quickly cleaned off and wrapped in a blanket and hat put on, and then the baby was brought over to myself and John. I couldn't hold the baby at first, so John had to hold the baby up by my head so I could say hello, and we had a few pictures taken then. My ideal was to have baby straight on me for skin to skin, but during the C-section, the baby was so big, I was losing a lot of blood as well, so they actually said to get the baby out, they normally take the head out of the incision space and then pull from the head, they pull the baby out, but the baby was so broad across the shoulders that they had to actually kind of pop one shoulder and arm out first and then kind of like S-shape the baby out. So that caused a bit more stretching and things going on in the tummy area. So yeah, I was losing quite a lot of blood. There was a lot of suction going on. So I had like a little bit of a hello with baby, and then John and the baby had to go back to the room where we had laboured, and while I was getting kind of like stitched up and stuff. So during that time it was a bit weird because I was just sat like lying on my own, just being stitched up, and all I could hear was the surgeons kind of like, I could feel like pressing on my tummy, but you can't feel any pain, and then I would hear them say, oh, she's losing more blood, like, and then more suction, and then like they'd press again, like, oh, it's just not stopping, and then you're just like lying there thinking, what the hell is going on, you know? Yeah, so it was quite an emotional 45 minutes. I think it took about 45 minutes to kind of like stitch me back up, stop the bleeding. They also transfused my blood that they collected. Ooh. Transfused my blood that they'd collected and gave it back to me. So when I got back into the labour room with John and baby, I was given my blood back through drip. When I got back into the labour room about 45 minutes later, this was about an hour after the baby had been born, just over an hour after, the baby was put straight onto my chest for skin to skin, and then we also attempted to breastfeed. And when I got back into the into the room, obviously the doctors came in to do a debrief, and they basically said, oh, the baby would have been too big for you to birth naturally because of how broad the shoulders were. They explained how they'd had to take the baby out during the C-section, and they said you would have never been able to birth this baby naturally. It would have always had to have been a C-section to get the baby out. So that was a bit disheartening because I'd gone through kind of all that labour and all that pain and exhaustion, and you know, the thought of not being able to, the thought of maybe my kidneys failing because I wasn't able to kind of like drink fluids because it made me like I just couldn't keep them down. Yeah, going through all that for them to say you would have never been able to birth this baby naturally was so, I was kind of annoyed. I was kind of annoyed, and I was obviously just so happy that the baby was here and that the baby was safe and I was okay, but at the same time it was such, the experience was so far from what I had envisioned and had wanted, and to hear them say you would have never been able to birth the baby naturally because of the broadness, you know, was just a bit of a twist in the knife while it's in type thing. But yeah, it's absolutely fine. Everything worked out fine, and this is no way slandering the NHS, because the care I had while I was in there, from the induction right the way through to when I left, which was, I left in the evening of Saturday, so the baby was born at just after 1 a.m. on the Thursday morning, and I had to stay in until I think I got discharged about 6 p.m. on the Saturday, the 30th, yeah, the 30th, and the care that I had from that time for almost a week was second to none. They were absolutely rushed off their feet. They were so busy. You know, they're severely understaffed. You know, I think any section in the NHS is severely understaffed. But saying that, the level of care that they give you is, it is just focused on you, and you feel like it's focused on you, and I can't fault them, and I can't thank them enough for bringing my baby into the world safely and looking after us the way they did. Just touching on a little bit of the breastfeeding journey. So basically, after I got back into the labour room, so just after an hour after the baby was born, so he was then placed on my chest for skin to skin, and we attempted to breastfeed. So the first kind of like parts of breastfeeding, it's just the baby just gets colostrum, which is like the golden thing. It's like all your immune boosting parts of before your milk comes in. So the baby actually fed quite well the first time, and the midwife actually said, "Oh, a really good feeder," you know. I was like, yes, we're going to crack breastfeeding, because I really, really wanted to breastfeed. I'd read so many benefits that the baby gets from breast milk, and the bond that is made through breastfeeding. And yeah, I just really wanted to do it. So we gave it a go. Through the next few days, obviously, if you're a first-time parent, they monitor how the baby feeds. So you get like a little chart that you write down on. So the first initial feed was really good, but then it kind of went downhill from there. The baby really struggled to latch, wouldn't maintain the latch, was constantly hungry even after feeding for hours, even swapping sides. I tried expressing, but just not much. So once the baby had got past like the colostrum, my milk didn't really fully come in. So we were trying to hand express. I say we, it's myself and the midwives. I also had the breastfeeding specialist come up and see me, and the breastfeeding specialist was very good, and all the midwives were really good. I had one midwife during the night shift that is why I refused to stay in hospital any longer, because I didn't want her. I don't think she was a midwife. I think she was a attending nurse. but she was just very negative, and didn't read my notes properly, so didn't understand what I'd discussed with the breastfeeding specialist during the day, would just point at me and tell me I was doing things wrong when in fact it's what myself and the breastfeeding specialist had come up with during the day. So yeah, she was a lot. She made me break down in tears, made me feel worthless, made me feel like I was a really bad mum, because my baby was always hungry after coming off the boob, even though they'd fed for hours. And I think I'd fed the baby on both sides for about 6 hours one night constantly, and they were still hungry. So I asked for a formula top-up, which is something I'd agreed with the breastfeeding specialist. She refused me a formula top-up, and when I asked to speak to another midwife or another nurse, she refused that as well. And every time I pushed the buzzer, she would pop in. I couldn't really walk very far, obviously, because I'd had a C-section, so I couldn't actually go and find a new nurse or a midwife, so that was very frustrating. So yeah, but yeah, we continued to try and breastfeed when I got home, with the formula top-ups, obviously, but the baby was just losing too much weight. So I decided I would try and pump breast milk to try and get my milk to come in and come through a bit stronger whilst giving the baby formula. But my milk just never really came in. I could pump all day and I would never get a full bottle. I think the most I got out was about an ounce, and that was through a few kind of like sessions in the day of expressing. So yeah, it was the best thing to do for the baby so that they could gain weight again, and get the nutrients they needed, was to go on to formula feeding, which was very difficult for me to swallow. I fought with myself a lot during that decision, but it was what was best for the baby, and then it also took a lot of pressure off me, so then I became a lot more involved, because I was just purely focusing on feeding the baby, that I kind of wasn't doing anything else with them. So yeah, it made me a lot better mum in the end, to take that pressure off. So yeah, that was a very long video, and if you're still here, thank you so much. If you have any questions, please pop them in the comment box below. And yeah, this was just my experience, and it's my honest and raw experience. So if you did like this video, please give it a big thumbs up, because it will really support my channel. I'm hoping to upload new videos every single week. There might be the odd 2 a week in there, so tick the little notification bell to make sure you get notified when I upload a new video. And please hit the subscribe button up there, and join this crazy fam, and it will really make me smile, make my day. Yeah, so like I say, if you've got any questions, pop them in the comment box below. But other than that, I will see you in my next video. Bye!